Hey Taylor, hey Pallas, how's it
Hey,
going?
hello. It is delightful to be here.
Mhm. Good. Now that I'm here with you two.
Yeah, welcome back to both of you. Excited to get the two of you, especially in this space together, to talk about the IC. And yeah, I was just saying, like, I couldn't decide whether to be like, let's talk about Chiron or let's talk about the IC or let's talk about both. And we were just talking about how, a lot of Chiron transits kind of brought you to IC work or has been involved in your IC work. So maybe both will come up. But yeah, this is exciting to kind of dive deep into this particular part of the chart. And I think it's interesting that I kind of talked about Saturn with both of you in different ways. Like Palace, we did the Saturn episode together with Zamboni, and Taylor, we did an episode on the 12th house and hypnosis, and we talked a lot about Saturn then too. And both I think we're in season one. Yeah. So if anyone's interested in other appearances of both Taylor and Palace on the show, definitely check out those episodes. And of course, you both were on this season, familiar faces, familiar voices. Taylor, you joined us for the water signs episode that just launched today when we're recording this, February 17th. But yeah, and then that was episode 4. Palace, you came on episode 3 to talk about cusp.
That was fun.
So yeah, welcome back.
Thanks. It is
Um,
fun to get to chat with you this time, Palace.
Yeah. Same mutual.
I think all three of us have 12th house Saturns.
Ooh.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay. And Kira, you pointed out to me earlier today that we all have like a 2 in our
Yeah, human
human
design.
design. And so that
Nice. Yeah.
I was kind of
Oh,
like, Kira, like 2s find each other. And you're like, Palace too. And I was like,
I love
Yeah.
that.
That's so
amazing.
true. What's your other number, Taylor?
5. I
5, right?
am a
Okay.
heretic. Heretic. I'm like, no, nothing is real. False. It's great. It's a good
It
time.
makes
It's a good
sense.
time.
Yeah. I think in Palace, we're both 2 4s, right?
Two
Ah,
fours. Oh,
okay.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay.
Not
Yeah.
paradoxical at all.
At all.
Totally
Not
integrated.
super mutable, confusing. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Um, I gotta do a human design episode.
I need to learn so much more about like this whole world
Yeah,
because it's every toe I dip into it is just fascinating.
exactly.
This makes so much sense.
I feel like
Anyway.
I've learned just enough of the language to sort of like
Mhm.
pass if it comes up, but otherwise I like know nothing about it.
Yeah, it sounds like we know way
But
more
I'm
than
just
we do,
curious. A lot
probably.
of people are
Totally.
finding it, right? And it's like
Yeah.
there's something interesting about that when a modality really like, yeah, becomes a cluster
Hmm.
for people.
Totally.
Yeah. Yeah. More on that and another episode in the future.
Just planting seeds now
Planting seeds,
for later.
exactly. Also, just worth it to note, we're recording this on the exact, literally like 60 degrees, 0 minutes exact Jupiter Uranus sextile. And that just feels really nice. I mean, yeah, it's like exactly opposite my Jupiter. My Jupiter is in Virgo at 11 Virgo, having this Jupiter opposition, Uranus trine to my chart ruler. And I just feel good, happy to be here with you guys. So yeah, I mean, I'm sure there are going to be people who are listening to this episode for the first time, or this might be their first time hearing or seeing or being introduced to you guys. So let's do our intros, SMR, your practice, yada, yada. Pallas, why don't you start?
Sure. I'm Pallas. I am currently in Jojaka, which is colonially known as Montreal. It is an amazing island, a little quiet currently the past couple of years, but stewarded by the Ganyanaka people of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. I am plant sitting here. My practice consists mostly of one-on-one client work, a lot of return clients. I'm also currently a like longer term consultant for arts projects, which is sort of new and fun. And I'm in a training program to become a practitioner in an ancestral lineage healing modality, which is taking up a lot of time and energy. And then also I'm in the final throes of writing and editing a little book. So yeah, that's my life.
A little book
Little
that
book.
happens to be about what?
It's about the IC.
Oh,
It just so
okay.
happens.
Interesting. Very interesting. So I'm sure you'll have a lot to say in this episode then about this topic. I'm assuming.
I have a lot to edit. Yes.
So Virgo right now. Yeah. Awesome. Welcome back.
Thanks.
And Taylor, how about you?
Yeah, I'm so excited to learn from Pallas. Pallas, let's practice your editing on us. So
I forgot my SMR.
Yeah.
I'm a
I just
Virgo
realized that
sun
too.
and a Sag moon rising, and I have a Pisces IC.
Yeah, we should share our ICs. Okay, good. So
Totally.
You said Virgo sun, Sag moon, and rising, Pisces IC, mutable AF. You mind sharing your Jupiter placement?
Jupiter in Aquarius. And I actually have a Jupiter Uranus sextile. It's because I'm a Uranus and Sag generation. So
cool.
Yeah.
Awesome. Sweet. Taylor, welcome back.
Thanks. I am, oh my God, where do I start? I am a Pisces sun, Pisces moon, Capricorn rising, with an Aries IC. Can't wait to talk about that. I'm in Long Beach. I'm from Los Angeles, and I've returned home. My practice is also largely one-on-one. I work both with astrology and hypnosis, which is what we talked about in our 12th house time together. I have just finished editing a tarot deck, and so that's very exciting. I've been putting that in my bio for like the past 2 years, so now it's real. And I'm like, okay. So that's very exciting and feels very Jupiterian. And speaking of, Jupiter is in Pisces for me at 29 degrees, conjunct my little moon there. So in my 3rd house. What else? Did I forget anything? I think I did it. I think I did.
You definitely did it.
I'm in school studying clinical psychology. There we go. I'm gonna like merge astrology and therapy and just like open up astral avenues to healing. So
yes.
Look forward to that. I'm really feeling the Jupiter right now. Jupiter just passed my sun, so I'm like,
and it's like
love it.
Yeah, and like not only like you are Pisces sun and rising, and you have Jupiter, or sorry, Pisces sun and moon is what I meant to say,
and
you
Mercury's
have Jupiter
in there too.
and Mercury, and you have Jupiter in Pisces. And you might think, oh, great, good thing you're a Capricorn rising. Well, guess where Saturn is?
Yeah, and that's on my ascendant. So just like
Saturn,
Capricorn. Just like
Saturn and Sag in the 12th. Noted on the ascendant. It's really, we're Big Daddy Jupe is loud right now in this crew, just so y'all know. Even though I'm wearing my Saturn earrings, I think I just intuitively picked this because all 3 of us are like rejoicing Saturn.
Totally.
Hermit, two-line hermit folks. I'm my sun moon rising, if you guys don't know, I'm a Scorpio sun, Aries moon, Pisces rising, with Jupiter and Virgo, and my IC is in Gemini, which is ruled by my Mercury in Sag, exactly opposite, exactly on top of my midheaven. So I have a lot of thoughts about the IC from this like detrimental perspective of myself. So let's get into it. Oh, before, I don't know why I'm like so intense about this, but I'm like, we have to say how we know each other. I think it's like being like a seventh house person. I'm just like,
Yeah.
also, I have a Jupiter Uranus trine natally, exact, Jupiter Uranus trine. So that's being aspected right now too by Jupiter and Uranus sextile.
Love
Cool,
that.
cool
Mine are
vibes.
square. Mine are, I
Oh,
have
interesting.
Uranus right at the end
Ah.
of Sag and then Jupiter right at the end of Pisces. So,
And it's Jupiter day right now
and
that
it's
we're
Jupiter day.
recording. And it just feels like this was all meant to be.
It really does. It's a divine moment.
It is.
It's a 12th house Saturn thing too. It's like, can't even help it. You can't avoid it.
Oh yeah, the
Just
timing
here. It's
piece.
just happening.
Yeah. We just end up right on time all the time.
I love that.
Yeah.
Love
Except the mutability thing.
that. Yeah, that might
No
interfere
comment.
a little bit.
But yeah,
Balance.
Pallas and I met at NORWAC 2019 talking about our 12th house Saturns.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And Taylor and I met,
I think at your influx party, at like the influx launch party, I think is where we met.
I was gonna say we met through Aaron.
Yes.
Aaron Shipley.
Aaron was leaving and was like,
you two need to
know these people I care
about. You know what? We met the first time at Alex Sparkly Cat's book launch event.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Oh, such sweet memories. Wow. Oh, I'm like,
I gotta get Ace back on the show. Yeah.
Oh, and like real spaces and just meeting.
Also, I might come say hi to you on Saturday if you're free.
Excellent.
I'm driving down. I'm driving down to have dinner with another Pisces that lives in Long Beach.
Excellent.
Because I know so many Pisces that live there. Marcella.
It's a good place for Pisces.
Yeah. Right on the water.
Absolutely.
Okay, now we'll get into it. Sorry, folks. This is just, again, it's super Pisces right now. Let's get into it. The IC. So when I say the IC, we are referring to a point in your chart that usually, depending on the house system you use, will be somewhere around the 5th, 4th, or 3rd house. Usually, most of the time, I think, I don't know if it's like okay to say most of the time, because I really don't know the percentages here, but I'm going to assume it's mostly in the 4th house, especially if you're using quadrant systems. And this is the point in your chart that begins your 4th house, is the cusp of your fourth house. If you're using whole sign houses, then it can fall anywhere between the 3rd, 4th, or 5th house. In extreme cases, the 2nd or 6th house as well. But yeah, this is an angle in the chart. This is a point. And we have 4 angles in the chart that are pretty critical points in the chart, critical degrees, you could say. The ascendant, which usually looks like an AC on a chart that you might look at on a computer software or something, or an app. And that is the ascendant. That's the point of the eastern horizon, and is related to the self, the identity, the body. Then we have the point directly opposite that, the descendant, which is essentially the western horizon, and represents the other, partners, relationships, our one-on-one sort of dealings. And then we have 2 other points that aren't really marked by the horizon. It's not marked by like this visible, phenomenon like the horizon is. And that's the midheaven and the IC. The midheaven, the MC, is usually what floats in the 10th, 11th, or 9th house sometimes. And even again, in extreme cases, it could end up in the 8th or the 12th. But yeah, it's essentially the 10th house cusp. And this point represents sort of like the highest point in the sky that planets get before they start to set towards the west. So we can say it's like a culmination point in the sky. And yeah, if you think about, how the sun rises on the eastern horizon, for a couple hours. It's rising, rising, rising. It gets to that point around 12 o'clock noon, depending on the time of the year, but around noon, when it's reached the highest point it's going to get before it starts to, kind of pivot towards the western horizon. And that point, that high point, is the midheaven. Usually looks like an MC on your chart if you're looking at it on a software or something. And then we have the point directly opposite that. And that's the point we're talking about today, the IC. It's the lowest point in the sky. It's weird to say in the sky because it's like the sky that we can't see, but the lowest point underneath the earth that planets get before they start to rise again towards the eastern horizon. So again, if we're using the sun as an example, the sun sets on the west, nighttime falls, and from that point forward, it's sort of like traveling underneath the earth, traveling, through the sixth house, through the fifth house, fourth house, third house, second house, until it gets to the first house again and rises on the east. So again, it reaches this sort of culmination point, this anti-culmination point, you could say, where it pivots to go from descending to ascending towards the east. And yeah, that's the IC. That's the point in the chart that, well, we'll talk about that. I didn't say what the midheaven was. The highest point in the chart, the midheaven, tends to be related to our reputation, our career, our profession, the titles and roles that we take on. And yeah, like I said, our reputation, how we're seen in the public. Whereas the IC is going to be what's opposite that. It's the things like where we are in private, where we're rooted, our home and our family. And yeah, let's get into that point. So there's some other names for the IC, right? It's also referred to as the nadir. And I think the IC stands for Imam Coeli. Is that correct?
I say Imam Cheli because I'm like a recovering Catholic, and so do like church Latin, but you can
already
say
learning. I'm like, yes, yes, Pallas, tell me.
Yeah, Pallas, tell us more if you know more about the meaning behind the words.
Yeah, sure. So it's Latin, of course. Imam is like below, or the deepest or the lowest, and then Cheli is like the sky, basically, or heavens. It's used in like to describe the like actual heaven too. So when we're saying Imam Cheli, we're saying either like the lowest point in the sky or below, not below, the bottom of the sky. I kind of, my favorite sort of poetic one, which I don't say out loud a lot, but in my head I think of it as like deepest heavens. So
That's
like,
beautiful.
that's how I think of it. So the IC is like the deepest heavens.
Cool. Yeah, where does nadir come from?
I think astronomically, the nadir is technically the opposite of the zenith. So if we're getting really nerdy, and like some people might want to, those are they're a little bit different than the midheaven IC, but in parlance, we call it the zenith and the nadir. That would be the two opposites. Yeah.
Okay, cool. We won't go into that.
No
need. But yeah, let's talk about like some things we will traditionally associate with the IC. Yeah, I mean, we kind of have the like very basic phrase home and family, right? That's like the immediate thing that comes to mind when we refer to the IC. But the thing about the IC, and well, any of the angles really, they are associated with the angular houses, the topics that they're associated with, but the points, the angles are like these sensitive points that like directly refer to those things. So and the fact that the MCIC axis can fall into other houses that aren't just the two angular houses adds a lot of depth and nuance to those, how those points are interpreted. So yeah, just starting from home and family, like, what does that mean? Because we're looking at again, like the bottom of the chart, like the lowest part of the chart. And so when you think of like the lowest part of something, that's the foundation, that's the base, that's the root. And I think of roots a lot when it comes to IC. I feel like a lot of astrologers do. Yeah, Taylor, do you have things popping off in your brain around just like some basic significations of the IC?
Yeah, absolutely. While you were talking, I was sort of just rethinking in my mind, kind of coming into the IC myself. And I think I kind of started to think about it as like our connection to source, like whatever source is, whatever source feels like, and kind of being like an astrological umbilical cord, like where in space, like are you coming in from? And that being a channel that kind of goes both ways. And because there's sort of flow into and out of this source space, it kind of started to make sense to me that it is a complex angle that shows us about both who we may be innately, but also sort of the nurturing that we received, and whether sometimes those things are in alignment and sometimes those things are not, and sometimes, yeah, totally. And I think exploring it that way and kind of looking at the other relationships to the IC, what planets are speaking to that space, what other connections are happening, we can kind of see like influences to and around that space that show us more about the stories about what sort of nurturing we both desire and also were given, and kind of exploring the nuance of like, when did I want this versus like, when was it just my circumstance that was happening? And like, how do I kind of reconcile that for myself now as a person who's grown out of a home space or a childhood space? So yeah, there's that thought.
Yeah.
That just sort of like,
no, I feel nourished by that. Yeah. I mean, especially the last part around like, where do I come from? Basically, is kind of what I like to say with the IC. It's like, where you come from. And how do I feel about that? Basically, like what parts of that really did nourish me and what parts of that didn't, but also like thinking about becoming an adult and separating from the child home, like what parts of that do I bring with me? And like, how do I resolve that patterning that was not aligned? I think of a lot about that. I think especially during the Saturn return and just, yeah, lots of fourth house IC stuff.
yeah, you just had the North Node passing over your IC. So I bet
actually I had an eclipse exactly on top of it. Yeah.
Casual. Super.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We could
So
talk
lots
about
of thought
it,
to that
but
space.
yeah. Yeah. How about you, Pallas? What's popping up for you?
That was all super beautiful. I feel the need to refer people to some astronomy if they do want to get nerdy, and it relates to this rootedness, right? So you both probably know the work of Gemini Brett. He's like the astronomer for astrologers guy. And he discusses the angles, like the ascendant is like where you rise, and the midheaven is reach, and then the descendant is rest, and then of course the IC is root. And so if people want to know more about the actual sky math about these angles and why they have these associations, I would say go check out his work. Yeah, and I think the angles as places we enter into, and so the umbilical cord, the connection to source really resonates with me, where it's like, I think of the ascendant descendant as where we sort of enter into like ourselves, into relationships, and then the midheaven, and this relates to, have the Saturn return stuff, and there's all sorts of reasons for that, right? Sort of like how we enter into authority, right? And then the IC as this point of, yeah, like how we enter into ourselves, right? And there's a connection with the soul, there's a connection with source with these pieces of ourselves that are there, we're not always aware of them, right? And this relates to childhood conditioning, right? This relates to all sorts of associations we might have, especially for like the third, fourth, fifth, right? And how those how those impact how we grow up too, and like how we die, right? And like traditionally, like the fourth house is also in mundane astrology, it's like property and real estate, right? It's like the literal earth. Like in horary, I think it's like earth. And then it's also where the dead live. I mean, the dead live everywhere on the chart, but the fourth is it's like it's where we're buried too, right? And so
Right.
it has Erin Sullivan, who's very influential on my own work, especially on this topic. She talks about like the womb and tomb, right? And how that's like a very fourth house, but then also associated to the IC because of that. Cycles.
Wow. I like it a lot.
Yeah, it's like very much where we come from and where we end up returning to, I love that. Yeah. And the association with the earth and land is huge as well. I like to say it's the fourth house is your homeland, or that connection to any sense of homeland, whether that's like where you grew up or where your people are from. That's a big piece as well. And just your connection to land in general, real estate, etc. And then just homes too. I would say any sort of like building spaces as well, if we're talking super general, any sort of like constructing of a space or building would kind of fit into the fourth as well. And then of course the father is a really traditional association with the fourth house. And I often get people questioning that, like, I thought it was the mother. Why would it be the father? I'd say in general, parents show up in the fourth house, right? Like when things are happening at home, like, to one of your parents, like that will usually show up in the fourth house. But specifically, father is associated with the fourth because of these things like land, and also things like heritage, right? I don't know if legacy is the right word, but heritage is probably a good word. Like your last name, tends to be from the paternal line, and any land that you receive, excuse me, land that tends to be passed down through, not tends to, as in not necessarily nowadays, but historically has been passed down through the paternal line. And so that's a couple reasons. Do you guys have any other thoughts about that, or additions to like the fourth house father, or even like family connection?
I can say something. Yeah. I mean, there's lots around this, and the distinctions between like the father and the mother, which is, often false in people's lives anyway. I think that both can happen, of course. And like you're saying, I think both parents being associated with the IC makes a lot of sense, not just both, all parents, right? And of course, when the IC is in the third, it also brings in the siblings. And then when the IC is in the fifth, it brings in the children, So there's like a whole kind of the IC itself, away from the actual house topics it's in, really pulls in kind of all those familial associations. And then all those like neighborhood, community, home, right? So brings all those in too. There's one of the ways I think it is interesting to designate like the IC as the father or the paternal figure, not necessarily a dude, and the midheaven is the mother or like maternal figure, not necessarily a woman, is when you're doing like derived houses, looking at ancestry. That's like one of my favorite ways to use this association. So it's like, and this is something I learned from Melanie Reinhardt. So it's like your fourth house. If you're looking at your father's father, you'll look at your seventh house because it's the fourth from your fourth, right? And you can kind of like go all the way around and look at all of your, look at the planets that rule those angles will often be who that person kind of shows up as, like a little fun trick for that one. So like, yes, I see as the father is reductive for sure, but also there are ways in which it's really helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah,
Right.
definitely. And that's astrology in general. It's like your seventh house is your partner and also your enemy. So,
yeah, exactly.
Also your battle opponent. Yeah. So, yeah, cool. Yeah, I think that's a good point you bring up about like if the IC falls in the third, it like brings a greater, I guess, like it kind of sensitizes that space a little bit more. So yes, it's connected to the family, but siblings, maybe extended family, cousins, like might be a big part of that family story for you. Maybe if it's in the fifth house, like children might be a really big part of that family story for you too. So that's a really good point. Yeah. Anything else we want to talk about? Just like basic IC associations.
Yeah, I think it is Melanie Reinhardt who I got this from. Pallas, your Virgo is like, you're so good with your sources. And I'm having such a Pisces Mercury moment of like, where did I get this?
You need all
this come
kinds.
from?
Just channel it. Just channel it. It's all good.
Totally. But I do think it is Melanie Reinhardt also who spoke about sort of historically speaking, the potential for the father to be an unknown figure, and that being connected to the IC in the fourth house, where the 10th house reflecting the mother is socially, culturally, historically speaking, the mother we interact with most frequently. And that's definitely interesting and tied to my like my exploration of my IC. So maybe we'll get into that more later. But just wanted to add that to this. Just to add that contrast of like it, Kira, you were saying like last name and like land and stuff, and then the other end of that being like I don't know this person, or like this person's hidden from me. No,
that's a point actually. I'm glad you brought up, because that's when I tend to bring up as well when talking about the fourth house and associated with the father. Paternity can be kept secret and can be kept private. It's a lot less likely that maternity is a secret. And not to say it doesn't happen, and that will definitely show up in the chart if that's the case, right? But like just in regards to the midheaven being associated with the mother, it's more likely that you'll be seen with the mother or maternal figure out in public, just historically speaking. So that's a really good point. The difference between public with the 10th house in the midheaven and private with the IC plays out really well in that scenario.
There's a piece about how the mother came to be associated with the IC2, right? Which is like the 12-letter alphabet thing when Cancer became the fourth. And so it's like, there's ways in which I love that. I've studied with Mark Jones. I love the like developmental model of the houses and the signs, but I think that's kind of how it does come to us, and where that like confusion between the tradition and then more modern associations, just if anyone was trying to trace that.
And you can kind of see like the inverse, where the mother would traditionally be the one at home with you, sort of nurturing you and taking care of you. And like the father would be the one you're looking up to and kind of like wanting to emulate or like bring honor to in some way. And so that makes, absolutely.
Yeah.
I love
that.
Patriarchy.
But I think it's in general fair to just look at the fourth house as the parents, the parental unit, the family in general. There's so many different like levels to, I like to say, like the spectrum. There's like fractals within the spectrums, right? Like the spectrum of the IC in and of itself, it could be so many different things. It can manifest in so many different significations. Yeah. Yeah. So part of the reason why I asked the two of you to come on here is because both of you have done projects specifically centered around the IC. And I wanted to talk to you guys about them. So yeah, Taylor, do you want to start and tell us a little bit more about your the research you've done, and give it to us.
I like starting because I feel like it'll be a little appetizer for the work that Pallas is doing. Here's the intro for like your whole book. So the IC journey has been on the newer side for me. And I think much like many of us come to astrology in the first place, it started off as kind of a curiosity about myself. And we said earlier, I'm very Pisces and I have a very strange Capricorn rising, but lots of earth and water. And then I have this Aries IC and nothing else in Aries. And it's ruled by a Mars in Taurus. So very much like not knowing what it's supposed to be doing. And I kind of came to this place where I knew all these other things about my chart, and I was like, yeah, I'm nice and I love people and like I just want to be responsible, but why am I angry also? Like what is this rage that burns in me, and like there are no planets that know how to express this. So like what's happening? And then I came to this IC place, and I thought, no one's really talked to me about this. I've never like dug into this space, and this is my Aries. I have Aries in me, and I was the last person who would have thought that would have been true at all. So this also was happening. Right before we started recording, we talked a little about Chiron, and this was happening as Chiron was coming for my 11-degree Aries North node. So I'm clearly here to figure out what Aries means. And so that sort of brought up a lot of that anger, a lot of that unresolved childhood anger of like, no one ever showed me anything, or like I was alone. And so I really started wanting to get to know this space. And it's interesting to me that you can have nothing else going on connected to it, and yet you feel it very potently. It's very much a core part of you. And so in my exploration, lots of reading, Melanie Reinhardt, absolutely. And just wanting to get a sense of how this space functions and informs all of these other parts of us. And so if this is our root, if this is sort of what is core within me, this is supporting all of the other, this is carrying the other parts of my chart. And so I should really get to know who's in here, like what is happening. And I think last year there was a lot of just like inner child stuff going around. Everyone's sort of talking about like my inner child. And same. I was like, oh my God, I'm so angry and I don't know what to do. And I think a big part of that too is that I also moved into a space where I'm finally able to kind of like have a sense of autonomy in my home. And so that brought up a lot of those old feelings of like, you've never really had this place. And so like, no wonder you've looked in here before. So my project became named Exploring the Inner Child Through the IC, because that was literally what I was doing. I was like, I want to know what these stories are. Who's ruling this IC? That alone tells me so much about whether or not that IC feels agency, whether or not that recognition opened the conversation or the question for me of, this is both who I am, but also not always what I wanted. And recognizing that a planet in detriment ruling this space, as well as the other conversations with aspects around that space, could really reveal what is desired there, as well as what interfered with getting those things. And that sort of double-edged sword very literally for me in Aries of like, I both am this by nature, but also these situations occurred and I didn't necessarily like them, but they were what was happening, and they have made up who I am. So I did this 3-part series of exploring the inner child through the IC. The last one was all about Chiron and its relationship to the IC. And it was so fun to just get to kind of explore people's charts in a new way. It was like I was looking at people's charts that I had already read before and just seeing new information, getting these stories about what childhood was like for us and why we're still sort of carrying around some of this unprocessed baggage, or why are we all crying about my inner child? Like, why are we all out here like freaking out about this tiny person that was left behind inside of us? So it was really fun to get to, I don't know, open up my eyes in a new way to something that I felt so familiar with already in terms of chart reading. So I think that's something I hope to maybe, last year it was sort of just like I'm learning stuff, let's hang out and chat about it. And so it'd be fun to kind of go back and, formalize that in a new way. But it's just such a fascinating rich space. And I'm so excited to hear about Pallas's project because I'm about to learn a lot. I keep saying that, no pressure. I was like, stop talking about me.
We Virgo and Leo placements are like, that's fine.
Right. Yes, I did. I am doing this. Very good.
No, but that's like, I think really beautiful. I think, inner child, I see that's just, yeah, chef's kiss, how that worked out. But it's so true. I mean, I never really thought about you like approaching the IC through that lens before, but it makes so much sense. And it really is that tether to our younger selves. And I would say even like the younger selves of our parents and like their parents and their parents, right? Like, because that's the type of wounding that gets passed down through the IC. And yeah, exploring that makes sense that would be, a way to explore different ways of healing some of those wounding, some of those inner child wounds. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah, we don't have that perspective then, right? So it's like you can't. That's also that invisibility part of that angle is like you don't know yourself or anything yet at that point when those things are happening. So as you move through and you're like, oh, like that's
yeah. And also, as someone with a planet in detriment ruling my IC, like a lot of what you said really hit. It's like, yeah, there's just a lot of for me, like confusion, with it being Mercury, it's just like so much left unsaid and so much like, yeah, I don't know, sort of like expectations, mine's on the midheaven without any sort of like, I don't know, with weird directions on how to get there, basically,
Totally.
I don't know. I haven't fully fleshed that out, but yeah, I don't know. That's a really interesting way of approaching it. So you did a series of like meetups or gatherings?
Yeah, like little webinars or like kind of, I call them workshops, and people submitted their charts and we like talked about them together in real time. So it was really fun to kind of like explore together. It was basically like, I invite you to share with me if this makes sense. And like, let's chat this out. So it was really fun. Absolutely. Yeah. Just a little series of kind of like, yeah, little Zoom hangouts, little workshop webinar somethings, but yeah.
Awesome.
Are they available for me to buy?
Yeah, actually they are up in my shop now.
Cool. Okay. Check those out. Cause yeah, it sounds like there's probably a lot of rich examples and just nourishing information to seep into. Yeah.
we kind of started exploring like the IC through modalities and through elements and like through sign and like what sort of things would be present here for this IC and like what sort of things would you want here versus what you know what you got instead. So yeah, it was a really nice community, kind of healing space of like, oh, we're all here and we're gonna be okay.
Do you feel like you could share some sort of example? I don't know. I feel like, I don't know if the three of us want to talk about our ICs, but I feel like we should share some sort of examples around like the type of work that we're talking about. But it is such a tender place. So understood if it doesn't feel right. Yeah.
I think last time I was here, I was like, I'm the Pisces who will tell everyone my address. So, like, I'm on Earth to overshare.
Okay.
Literally. That's what I'm here for. But Pallas, if you want to start, I feel like I've been dominating this space. So
We could do like a little bit of I'll tell you about my project, and then we can come to some of our personal stories, because I think it
Yeah.
actually
I like that.
blends in.
Okay,
awesome.
cool.
The project is all about personal stories.
Okay, let's do that. Yeah. Thank you for running through that though, Taylor. I love that project. I remember like seeing you posting about it and I was like, this is brilliant. And I think that's what actually gave me the idea to do this episode. So yeah.
Planting seeds. Love it.
Pallas, tell us about your IC work.
In December 2017, right when Saturn entered Capricorn, right when there was a Venus cazimi in Capricorn, I had emailed a friend asking him for a book recommendation. And he called me at some point instead. We don't talk very often. And he called me and he was like, how about you write a book instead? I was like, it's like I'm always asking for more books. This was him being like, you've read enough books. It's like, it's time to do something. And yeah, I know, God.
It's time to do something with this knowledge.
He was like, so what would you write about? What would you write about? And like immediately I was like, oh, I'd write about the IC. One, because in my own very early endeavors in research to find anything, and this is probably what you ran into as well, Taylor, is there's very little. Like there's very, very little. And I've come to realize that part of the reason there's very little written about the IC or spoken about the IC is because it's really difficult to write and speak about. So there's that. But yeah, but also, you know, what was available. It's just, you know, my clientele up until that point, I'd come to the IC in so many of those sessions. You know, we'd be looking at any issue that they have presenting to them, that they want to be working with astrology as like a therapy modality, right? In themselves, like a DIY one. And we would just constantly end up at the IC. I was like, okay, we have to, and then of course my own story leads us there too. But yeah, and so I started writing, and in a few months I wrote like 20,000 words, and I was like, okay, cool. But then because I'm mutable and, you know, have Jupiter sextile Uranus, which we were just talking about, I ended up like on the opposite side of the country from my manuscript with a broken ankle in between astrology conferences in 2018. So the book didn't get finished. And by the time I got back to it in late 2019, I guess, for when I was finishing my master's, so it was a whole other thing to write. And then I also realized that like my story wasn't enough. Like I have a sweet, interesting, mildly traumatic IC story, you know, but it's so specific, and it's like, it's my story, and it's not, yeah, this was Chiron going over my IC. It was like partially writing the story, but partially being like, no, this isn't, I've seen this method and this way of looking work in so many of my client sessions. And like, I want to make this an offering to like the community, to my communities. And then being like, they actually need to be a part of this. And so I was like, okay, great. So I just took on like a major research project, not just like writing a zine, basically. And then I started working more in it early 2020, but then 2020 happened. And I was invited to do a talk on my research for Inner Sense Healing Arts in Chicago. Drew and Kelsey invited me to do that. And that was the motivation to start doing actual interviews. And coming from my academic background, I have some stuff in like, feminist qualitative research methods and things and critical ethnography. And so I was like, well, I mean, I guess I am sort of a person who could do this without being an asshole. So I started doing interviews, and it was only with clients, like people who'd seen me for a client session before. And I did about half of them. And so that was like mid 2020. And then I gave that presentation, The Astrology of Coming Home. That was, November of that year. And then I also started a Patreon to support the writing and the research, which is like a really lovely space. And and then it kind of went away again because I went back to my master's, mutable stuff, just mutable things. And then I went back to it when I presented at the Portland School of Astrology conference on and like by that point, it had veered really into like grief work, right? And so my grief work became like a huge part of the IC work. And I think this relates to, Taylor, what you're saying about how inner child stuff became really popular during the pandemic. Popular is maybe the wrong word. It just like, it got its like hooks in us, right? And I think that's because people were stuck like alone in their house and they couldn't run away from their inner child anymore. They had to like tend to them, right? And so I think a lot of like the grief work that people turn to as well was part of that too. It's like, oh wow, when we can't do anything, we like really have to face this stuff. And so I think, like the work you're doing definitely topical to what's going on right now for everyone. And I think like my work fits in that same kind of like wave, right? So then the past couple months, I've finally gotten back to doing the rest of the case stories. And I'm doing one for every sign, and I'm doubling up on a couple of the signs for, Pluto's about to enter Aquarius. It's like Aquarius ICs like need a little bit extra love, I think. And then also because I'm sort of trying to do the ruler of the IC in the houses as well. Like I'm trying to do both, which is a lot. But it's just like the stories are so special, and like, from the workshops you did, it's like the stories really make it. And that's because the IC is like, I talk about, I released like a little introduction, which of course will be all rewritten. But I talk about how like, it's not a place that you can know by like rational means. And that's why it's hard to like, astrology is so intellectual, right? Versus it's like, it's a lot more embodied and it's straight up unknowable. Like you really can't know. So it's like, why would I try to look at something that's impossible to see, right? Why would I try to know something? And it's like to teach us different ways of knowing, right? And especially ones that like have been forgotten or have been like oppressed. And so the stories I have, they're just amazing. I just love them so much. So like diverse and just like astounding, and the work people are doing to I don't know if you have more questions about that. I'm like just sort of in awe of those stories.
No, I mean, I think we're both in awe just by like, this whole process that you've been on and figuring out how, the shape of this book and this work. Do you feel like you have like sort of like a core thesis around this work, or like even like your approach to the IC?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, no. But I think that's part of it. I mean, really, it's a response to like the privileging of the ascendant and midheaven, right? Like these are these knowable things. This is where the sun rises and the sun is at the highest, right? This isn't where the sun sets and the sun is the furthest away from us it can be. It's like and that just speaks to all sorts of things. Like you had Jason Hawley on, right, to do the episode about sect, which I actually haven't listened to,
Oh my
but
God,
I
you're gonna
did
love
his
it.
psychologizing sect series for Astrology University.
Oh, cool.
And like the way he talks about like night consciousness and twilight consciousness, and how like day or solar or diurnal consciousness is in like Western society so valued, right? And so it's really speaking to, this brings in like patriarchy and white supremacy. It's like the whole, just all the things as to what builds that, what builds those structures. And so the ignoring of the IC in even modern astrology, right, is, I think, has to do with all those things as well. So being able to bring it out and talk about it in a way that like includes us, right? My stories are like all about, it's like, it reflects my clientele, right? Which is like queer, living with disabilities, like trans, like, yeah, chronic illness, right? Majority, the stories are, the majority are not white, you know? It's just like and they're all young. Everyone is under, or I guess is, I think 42. So someone going through their Uranus opposition is the oldest case story. And yeah, they're not stories you see used as case studies in astrological stuff, right?
Yeah.
But yet we're the consumers of astrology. We're the ones actually using it as a therapeutic modality, right? But in a way that's like not subject to so many violences and systems that we've also inherited and have to live with it, right? So it's like, how do we survive? How do we survive doing that, and like sharing stories and building relationship and recovering things, and like, you know, coming home, finding a sense of that rootedness. So it's just, it's a book showing you a little bit of method, but mostly pretty nuanced pieces of people's healing journeys, whether it's ancestral or magical or inner child work.
Cool. Beautiful. I
That was
cannot
more
wait.
succinct than I thought it would be.
That was great. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh. That was amazing.
I just can't wait for folks to, be able to buy this book.
Absolutely.
And read this work. And I think it's so needed, this type of book in astrology. So thank you for making it.
Yeah, honestly,
Thank
like
you
what
for
you said at the
supporting it.
beginning of that, just saying like there's not a lot of there's not a lot to find about this. So we need you. we need
Yeah,
you.
totally. I know. And when you said the thing about how like you talking about your own work was going to be an introduction to this work, I was like, oh my God, is Taylor going to write my introduction?
I mean,
our Jupiter and Uranus conspiring right now.
Literally.
We'll talk.
I
Love this.
love it.
Wow. Should we talk a little bit about our ICs and like our IC experiences? Because I feel like we need to add some more some examples to this. I'm curious to hear you guys' thoughts on my IC situation, which is that, you know, I don't have any planets there. It's at 18 Gemini. And by the way, I'll just say this now because I don't think it'll come up again, but there was an eclipse right on my IC at 19 Gemini last June 2021. And I came home to my, we live in the same house that I grew up in. It's been pretty much it'll be 30 years this June, I'm pretty sure, that we've been in that home. And we moved in during Gemini season, which I think is really interesting when the sun is in Gemini. So for the past couple of years, but especially this past year or last year when the North Node is moving through my fourth house, they've been kind of like demolishing stuff on my street, my home street, like the little road I grew up on. And so I came home again in September, after that eclipse, and it was everything across the street from our house is demolished. And by that, I mean, like, it used to be just like woodland, and like, it just used to be like nature. And, I think there was like a swamp back there or something. Like, there was a park. This park is still there, but behind the park, it was like green, basically like forest essentially. And I come home and it's all just dirt. It's just piles of dirt now. And they're building condos. They're building, yeah. And so I was just like, wow, there was a solar eclipse in my IC, and my childhood like hometown is like completely changing. I actually just got a text like an hour or so before this from someone being like, sorry if I have the wrong number, but are you willing to take a cash offer for my home address, like where my family still lives? Yeah. So just like been dealing with a lot of like, I don't know. It's weird. My family, like, we just paid off the house too. I say we, like I had anything to do with it. My dad just paid off of the house. And yeah, it's just kind of interesting to think about, like, at the same time, these eclipses were happening, North Node in my fourth house, and I moved into my own place for the first time, which has been extremely healing, being able to, which we can talk about. But yeah, I guess that's just something I wanted to note. But yeah, my IC is Gemini, ruler of my IC is Mercury on my midheaven. And yeah, I have a lot of thoughts about it, but I'm curious if you guys have anything that comes to mind off the bat.
One of the case stories is a Cancer IC ruled by a Capricorn moon on the midheaven. Yeah, there's like when I see that signature, and this isn't even taking into account dignity, right? But there is sort of like a displacement, just ever present. And I mean, a lot of people in this world deal with feelings of that. But when you have that signature, it's like, even if the home is there and good and like relatively supportive by like, modern standards, it's by millennial standards, yeah, there's like that feeling of displacement. So an eclipse rocking that, like, on top of that already, I think that yeah, that's sensitive for sure.
Yeah
Thinking about what you said before about the expectations of that Mercury and sort of having to figure out how to get where you're going on your own, that distance, like knowing that you are across the country from like this home too, feels very much like that distance that you were just describing, Pallas. And I feel like, thinking about Gemini on the IC, I have seen people who are really interested in family stories, or like really informed by kind of like where we came from, like what are these kind of word of mouth things about who we are and our traditions, and like what we care about. And coming back to your Mercury, I feel like I see you talk about your family as like being really proud of where you come from, but I also see you having to, and again, as Pallas said, like that displacement of like, but I need to go over here though. Like that's really important to me. And also like, I have to go. I'm figuring out I'm on the hunt for stories. I'm seeking out stories, or I'm seeing where putting these stories into the world takes me next. So I think that's really interesting.
Yeah, that's the distance piece, I think, is like crucial when it comes to an opposition and the need for distance. And like my relationship with my family improved so much after, I left home, and I intentionally only come home for like a couple of days at a time now, not because I don't love the shit out of my family, but because it's just more comfortable. Like the distance is more comfortable. And that's something I've been learning throughout time, just thinking about oppositions and working with oppositions. But yeah, the need to sort of, individuate or do something contrary to the family story is very loud, I think, for me. Yeah. Also, just to note, just kind of looking at like very traditional, looking at it from a very traditional perspective, like again, looking at the IC as the father, the ruler of the IC as the father. My dad, it's not like famous or anything, right? But he is very well known in his niche field, right? He works, actually he just retired. He just retired during his Uranus return. He's 81. But yeah, he worked, actually, I should just note, he was born during the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction in Taurus at 11 degrees of Taurus, which is where Uranus is right now. And yeah, that like Uranus station basically was his last time at work, which is really cool. Released him from that. But yeah, he's someone that like he worked in the laborers union and his local construction union, basically from like, I think he started in the 60s and worked his way up from like being a laborer to like being the president of his local union. And so he knows fucking everybody. I could call any union office and be like, I'm Charlie Taborn's daughter. And it's like, I'm getting the most warm welcome and like best service. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, my dad, although he's a very like Scorpio, chills in the basement all day type of guy, is also like very well known in his field, right? Ruler of the fourth on the midheaven. Yeah, and there's a lot we could say about that too. But something else that kind of I think about a lot with the ruler of the fourth in detriment, or especially on the midheaven in this highly visible place, it's like the private becomes very public in that scenario. So I tend to have apartments that like I tend to keep my windows open, you could say. Like I hate curtains, and so thinking about like literally my private space becomes like very visible. And even right now where I live, it's like to come into my apartment complex, you like walk down a driveway. Anyone who walks down the driveway can see directly into my apartment because I don't have anything covering the windows, and I have floor to ceiling windows, right? So it's like, but literally like my private is public in a way, and that's a very literal manifestation of the ruler of the midheaven, or the ruler of the IC on the midheaven, that I just thought I would share. But yeah.
I love that.
Yeah, I think that like the extra layer, like I like looking at like the ruler of the IC and then the ruler of the midheaven and then aspects between those two, right? Because I of course like the ruler of your midheaven is square that.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
that's like a whole other layer to that. And I think that says something about the distance, and then also the what you've one of the sort of quippy things I like is that like the midheaven is like legacy and the IC is lineage. And it's like what the thing about that is that they're sort of end up being the same thing. Because of course we spoke about, or you two both spoke about like the intergenerational things we inherit, right? And that goes that goes back to the dawn of time. Like, so I think especially in those aspects between the two angle rulers, we can often see some of that, right? And so this like relationship to work and this relationship to being public and how that relates to like distance and privacy, right? It's like that's all feels like it's present in that signature with the square.
Yeah, the rulers of all four of my angles are angular and in detriment, squaring each other. So it gets really like all of it is kind of gets mushy, but yeah. I'm curious, Taylor, your thoughts on your IC ruler and detriment, and yeah, just like your IC story in general, because for you, it's not, an opposite signs, it's an adjacent sign detriment. And yeah, I'm just curious about your story there.
Yeah, absolutely. And fun too, because the ruler of my IC is not on the midheaven. It is in that private space. And in Placidus, it is in the fourth house also, which just kind of like adds to that feeling. Yeah, my Aries IC ruled by this fourth house, fifth house Mars. A lot of, well, I'll go back to what I mentioned earlier about the fourth house signifying sort of like an unknown parent. And without getting too far into the drama of my life, I will state that I have two dads, and one of them was very consciously my guardian, my legal father, and one was my biological father, and I did not know him. It was very much a secret that it was happening. They both have Aries Mars, so falling in that house also, just adding to that. And so that whole sort of like where you came from is a mystery, and now you'll meet this person and then you'll be separated from this person, and this person passed a couple of years ago, and so it remains sort of mysterious to me, and having to kind of do that work on my own now. But yeah, that Mars in that, I definitely feel that Mars in the fourth house in Placidus, in the sense that and I should mention too that my Mars being in Taurus is opposite my Pluto in 10th and Placidus as well, so that adds a lot of fun, and is also trine Neptune on my ascendant, so there's a whole host of things, but there was a lot of like Mars energy in my early life in my house growing up, and I do understand absolutely like Pluto in my 10th in Placidus and 11th in whole sign feels very connected to my mom. My mom is a Scorpio. My mom was very much like the more visible choice making parent, and the parent I spent the bulk of my childhood with, but also was like this very imposing force of like, you're not doing things the way that I would expect you to, and me being like, okay, well, no one's telling me how to do things. So there was a lot of Mars energy for sure, a lot of contentious energy. And interesting enough, my mom is a Taurus rising, so Aries is in her 12th house, and also in Placidus, my moon is in her 12th house. So like I'm her enemy. Like I am like. But this is also someone who has said like she's never been angry in her whole life, which I find very fascinating, because here I am like, why am I so angry all the time? So that also, that kind of makes me feel like I am embodying anger that maybe she wasn't able to or allowed to, as a biracial Black woman born at a time when that wasn't legal, and being a twin and not having agency of her own. And so I definitely recognize where I'm sort of carrying out something that has been suppressed or repressed in some way. So it's definitely been similar to what you were saying, Kira, about like, I kind of have to go be on my own though. That Mars definitely added that energy, and that Aries I see is like, I'm not staying put. Gots to go. And Pallas, since you mentioned kind of thinking about the relationship to the ruler of the midheaven, Venus rules my midheaven and is in my first house and is directly square that midheaven IC line. And interestingly, like rules my Mars in Taurus, but also is just at the point where it's about to enter into the orb of square. So it's like Venus at 27 degrees, which Pluto is coming for in less than 2 weeks. So there's also this sort of like, I don't know, because Mars didn't really have didn't have any agency. Why would it? As a child, really linked up with that Neptune on the ascendant of like, let me be not let well are you nice? I'll be nice to you. Like everyone's mad at my house. Everyone's angry. Everyone's angry and like kind of off doing their own thing. So that's, that really brings me to that sort of two sides of the same coin, that like I am an independent person. I do have to figure things out on my own, especially being ruled by a planet in detriment. It's like, nope, I got to do this my way. I'm going to have to spend some time. I'm going to break it 5 times first because I'm going to be mad that I can't figure it out. And then I'm going to calm down and figure it out. But definitely, oh no, I'm having a Pisces moment where it's floating on my mind. Kind of figuring out like I am kind of left to my own devices, and that is both good and not desirable. Everyone just thought I would figure things out, and it was like, I actually have ADHD and nobody knows that. My mom
relatable.
Probably, so nobody knows this. Like,
yeah, exactly. I want to say to my mom all the time, like, you probably have ADHD, but like none of my sister and I weren't allowed to get tested. We finally both did, like on our own. But I'm like, Mom, we get this from you.
Yeah.
I hear that. But no, I think something that I'm curious that if you relate to with your IC ruler and detriment being like your family just feels like is so different or opposite from like everyone else around you's family,
Oh my God. I couldn't even talk about my biological father. It was not allowed for me to talk about. No one, I have 3 sisters and they have the same last name and I have a different last name. I didn't even meet my 2 older half sisters until I was like a couple of years old. And so, yeah, I was not like anybody. I also, both my dads are white. And so the surviving father is a psychiatrist. And so I was definitely like private school kid surrounded by white kids who were like, what are you? What is that? And really just like I think that's a really great point. Yeah, absolutely. Not really being like other families. And also like not being able to talk about family.
Yeah.
I feel like my mom kind of has her own sort of mental health journey that we won't go into, but I didn't have friends over as a kid. Like it wasn't,
Same.
I
never had friend over.
That just wasn't it. And so I would always have to go to people's houses and it would kind of be like, why aren't we going to your house? And I'd be like, I don't actually have language for this. So I can't really tell you, but like, I don't know. And that actually, it was a point of contention in my friendships as a young person, because as we stated before, this is all happening to you before you have the perspective or the language to actually understand it. And so I would be so weird and just like really flip-floppy, Venus in the first, like, who am I talking to? Are you my friend? I'll be your friend. Please be my friend. And I felt like I was just sort of like constantly trying to find where I would fit because I didn't really feel like I fit at home even. But also no one was going through what I was going through. Like no one had a secret father or like a, who's like also a foreigner. So like what? No one had that situation. No one had like my Black mother. So it was just sort of, okay, I am strange. I'll just
I totally relate to that. Like my parents have a 24-year age gap. No one I knew had that. And then like, just having a dad that was a lot older. Therefore I have like 4 or 5 older siblings too, who I never grew up with. I always knew who they were, but like, they were much older than us. And just like, such a different family situation. And also very secretive too, about like, just like, don't tell people about your family. Like, that's just kind of like how it was. So much. And then of course, like also not fitting in with the family too. And then even things like you said, like kind of being being Black in a school with mostly white people, mostly like upper class white people, or like that's not where we came from at all. And then even within the family, this is why I think the double detrimental stuff comes in, but like even both of my parents like were the odd ones in their big family unit. So and by that I mean like they were the ones who kind of like got out and like were the different ones, married the right person, you know what I mean, like didn't have the same type of troubles that their siblings did, basically. And so therefore our family within our larger family was kind of the odd one out, in that we just did better, but we again, I had nothing to do with this. If anything, I caused my parents to lose way more money than no, but yeah, like my parents and our family unit kind of put it on a pedestal by like everyone else because of like how my parents do, where it's like, you know, my cousins think that we're like rich people, which we're absolutely not, but like then I'm like going to school with all these actual rich people where I'm like, you know, there's such a weird dynamic there around just like never fitting in, no matter where you go. It's like, it's always going to be opposite, you know, you're always going to be the odd one out in some way, and having to reconcile that, you know, that's something I've had to kind of work with a lot, just being such like a detrimental person. And yeah, reconciling the fact that like there's always going to be this otherness to like the major aspects of my life. And yeah,
absolutely.
Pallas, how about you and your IC your IC story?
I just want to like take a second for just appreciation for both of your shares, like care, Taylor, to all you shared. Thank you.
We're hugging. We're hugging.
Yeah, we're hugging.
Oh my God, Norwalk can't get here soon.
Gosh.
I'm just assuming you're coming to Norwalk.
Yeah, are you coming, Taylor?
I'm gonna be in school.
Okay.
It's a bummer, but I'm there in spirit.
Sometimes.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Yeah, so you both have the ruler of your midheaven square your midheaven IC. It's fascinating.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm like, what thread to pull on? So I have a Pisces IC. It's in the third decan. It's ruled by Jupiter in Aquarius, which is, I mean, of course, third house, whole sign. It is in the second by quadrant, but it's also in Aquarius and retrograde, so it sure doesn't act like a benefic in the second. But that's a different signature. Yeah, so dignity wise, it's like most of the planets in my chart are peregrine, so they don't really do much. My sun is in Virgo, but it's on the very opposite side of the sign, so it doesn't have all that much of a relationship. It's in my 10th whole sign, right? But it's on the opposite side, so it's like super cadent. My Mercury is in Leo, opposite my Jupiter in Aquarius. So that's
God.
So my angle rulers are opposed and inversion to their angles.
I just love a Mercury Jupiter aspect. Any of them I'm happy about.
Yeah, it's a good one. I feel like anyone talks to me for 5 minutes and I was like, oh yeah, that's Mercury, Eric and Mercury Jupiter. Yeah,
I have the square, you have the opposition, Taylor has the whole sign conjunction. Yeah.
Oh my God, I love that. Oh, what a good time. Story wise, I was a really sick kid. I was like super sick. I was like, Pisces, like respiratory illnesses, pneumonia, all while I was an infant, that created all sorts of fun things. Mostly to do with how I perceive the world and spirits, and all that fun stuff. Really, I was like a nature kid. You know, I was always off by myself in the woods, in like a swamp by my house, you know? They're going to tear it down at some point, but there's a railroad going through it. So mostly it's unusable. So it's kind of safe, I think. Yeah, the Jupiter definitely functions being cadent, being an inversion. I see it as like, it's kind of off on its own kind of journey. And then it can't really, like a planet in inversion, right? Like it can't really go home in the same way that, other planets who see the angle can at least have a relationship to that I see, right? It can be, yeah, the aversion is some of the trickier ones I think that I've come across. Yeah, I didn't grow up in a very religious household. Like both my parents' families came from Catholicism, but it was very, like sort of a Central Eastern European one that is mainly about like baking bread and gardening. It's like it's not what you necessarily think is Christianity.
I'd be into that type of Christianity.
Yeah, that's my mom. She's that one.
Break bread for Jesus.
Yeah, and then my father's was like I inherit, and so I associate the Pisces I see very much with my paternal line, actually, and it was like very like Scottish Catholicism, right? So it's more of a philosophy than a religion at that point. It was very associated with like scholasticism and literacy and that kind of achievement, and very like highly intellectual. And so that was I was like, okay, neither of these both give me kind of tools to sort of understand why I can talk to dead people, but like not actually, right? It like gives me a lot of tools to be able to sort of turn away from it, whether that's turn away from it from like and turn toward like animals and plants, or turn towards books, right? And it wasn't until so Chiron came from my IC. There's a whole bunch of other things that are relevant to this, like to lead up to this story. Actually one of them probably is. There was a Uranus-Saturn opposition around 2010, 2011, which was at the end of Pisces Virgo into Aries Libra. And that was the first time I traveled really at all outside the country. And I went to Scotland, and which was where this paternal line's from. And I literally it was February. It's like, I didn't know what I was doing. I like stood on the shore, like staring out at these like islands of my grandparents. I knew nothing. But couldn't get there because I hadn't scheduled it. And it was, 2010. So Google wasn't all that great. And so I couldn't get there. And I was like, I guess I'll come back. And then Chiron on that IC was a long string of homelessness. I wasn't without shelter. There was only like one night that I even got close to that, but it was between 2017 and 2020. Basically, I lived in I stayed in like 80 different places, really. It's a lot. Yeah, like that's not even it sounds like an exaggeration, but like I counted at one point and I was like, this just a lot. Which some of it was at one point it became intentional. I was like, oh, if I'm not paying rent anywhere, I can, living out of a backpack, I can go travel to all these astrology conferences to volunteer and to meet people, and I took the opportunity to go back to Scotland. And I got to Barra, and this was summer 2019. So this was like right at kind of the tail end of it. And so I got back there, and then I went to the Faculty of Astrological Studies summer school, and that's where I studied with Melanie, and they had a track about the astrology of ancestral healing and like astrology stuff. And by that point I was like, okay, I had a health crisis early 2019, and it was like there was a new moon. My progressed moon was in Pisces, and there was a new moon in Pisces, and I just had like a really super visceral visitation by grandmas. I was like, okay, fuck it, like I guess I'll just lean into this now,
Bring it in.
right? Yeah. I was like, of course I'd already started writing the IC book too. And I was like, okay, I see what's going on here. And so that all, kind of came together. And then anything I do that leans more into approaching the IC topic in a kind of collective way, right? Recognizing more and more how much of my own story is not my own story, right? Like releasing a kind of dependency on individualism that I wasn't so much raised in as much as other people who maybe grew up in like rural so-called Canada, but it's in a lot of us. And the more I kind of accept that there's so much we don't and will never understand. And one of those many, many multitude of presences of various levels of the spirit world, right, it's just undeniable, and living as if it's just a fact of life. And because it always has been to me, I just haven't been very open about it. But my writing about it, right, does seem to lead to amazing places like us having this conversation.
Yeah. Wow.
That's a bit roundabout, but
no,
it's perfect.
Yeah. Truly, you're really good at telling stories. third house.
Ninth house Mercury too, right?
Yeah.
That pilgrimage shit.
Definitely. Wow. That's beautiful. I mean, the pilgrimage for sure. And the Chiron transit over your IC and just being without any sort of that's when I met you during that. I remember I actually completely forgot that was like a part of your story until you just brought it up again. But I remember us talking about that when we met and first started connecting. And it feels like, I mean, Neptune kind of being down there now, you're still sort of dealing with like, where the fuck am I?
There yet.
Okay, yeah, because you're still
slow crawl.
Because you both have late Pisces stuff. Here's to hoping this. I was just gonna say, here's to hoping this Venus Jupiter conjunction brings you guys some good luck in that arena. What were you gonna say about Neptune?
I was gonna say, because when Neptune entered, it's part of this story too, because it kind of brings in the astrology stuff. Which I'm sure your own astrology journeys are both tied into your IC signatures too. So Neptune entered Pisces and then immediately opposed my sun. And I was like, holy, like it was so much. It was so many things happened. So many things happened. But of course, the further I got sort of into like working with clients, I started seeing them like go. And the thing about Neptune transits, right? And Neptune aspects too, is like you just forget about them all the time. Like
all the time.
It's like, what? Neptune square my moon now? I thought that was like 5 years from now or like 5 years ago. Just doesn't happen. So, but eventually I like noticed it enough and I was like, oh great, Neptune's gonna come for my IC. It's actually one of the stories. I have 2 Pisces IC stories, which is they're both so beautiful. They're both Pisces ICs with Jupiter in the 7th. And they're both about gardens. It's just like, it's just so beautiful. Okay. What was I saying?
Neptune made you forget.
Oh my God. Of course, because we invoke Neptune and this is what happens
all the time.
So one of the case stories centers partially around a Neptune conjunct IC transit. And I was like, oh, that's cool. I'll get to, and then I was like, oh shit. It's just like, Neptune for sure.
Yeah.
I hear that. I also love that you brought up visitation from grandmothers. That happened to me actually with the The Venus retrograde over my IC. And I actually was like living at home with my family for the first time since I had moved out for college during the beginning of the pandemic. And there's a lot of Gemini signatures just through like family members, but my grandmother has Jupiter in Virgo. She's a Pisces. Virgo lunar eclipse Pisces, but like Jupiter and Gemini is what I meant to say. So like detriment Jupiter, and then that's my mother's mom. My dad's mom is a Gemini, Lillian. She passed a long time ago, but she's a Gemini. So her birthday is like 2 days before my sister's, who's a Gemini, and my sister's birthday usually falls on Father's Day. So I always feel a lot of like just family stuff around Gemini season. Of course, it's also my, fourth house. That I remember finding her obituary, or whatever that program thing is. I guess that's obituary, right? Where they give you at the funeral. I found that as I was living in my childhood home, right? Like my childhood room, once again, during this Venus retrograde over my IC. And I remember, I started to like leave her offerings and stuff. And I remember one day I woke up to someone like caressing my face in the morning, and it was definitely her. No one was there when I opened my eyes, but yeah, it just just how the IC, I bring this up just to kind of say like the IC is our connection to our lineage, like both lineages really, but especially the paternal lineage, right? Like that's my dad's mom. And there's just something really special about being able to sort of, start to work with that side, or either side really. That I see it happen a lot with people who are in fourth house years or have some sort of fourth house activation, like a Saturn transit or outer planet transit through the fourth. Just digging into your roots. It can be so healing.
I love that.
Yeah. I mean, from derivative houses too, if we're doing that thing, it's like your father's mother is actually your ascendant. Because it's the 10th from the 4th. So there's like an interesting thing there.
Wow.
I love that.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Yeah, the grandmas are amazing.
I love this because as an Aries IC, I spearheaded working with like ancestors or guides or trying to connect with lineage. And I think that's another part of my Aries IC is that I do not know a lot of these things. And one, like my dad literally was a secret, and so like didn't get those stories from him, and so we'll have to do that on my own. And not really knowing, again, my mom sort of being the Pluto opposition to my Mars, like very much controlling the stories that she told us about things. And later my sister and I realizing like what she told us doesn't make any sense. This is weird. And so like needing to be the first person to really kind of like figure this stuff out, or creating a sense of lineage or digging it up for myself where I wasn't really handed it, or where it's been distorted or like misconstrued in whatever ways. And so yeah, and that's I really love that, because I started doing that in 2020. Like I just sort of instinctively started in ritual. Like I was kind of like, hey, council, what's up? And like they just started appear. Like it was very foggy at first. It was this like a table of people whose faces I couldn't see, and I was like, oh, you showed up. That's cool. I can't see you, but I really appreciate you being here. This is awesome. And this is so dope. And right around that time, I had a reading with Sarah Faith Gottesdiener, who is Goddess on Instagram and does sort of like channeling readings. And she was like, I'm seeing your guides. I'm like, they're so excited. I've never seen anyone with more excited guides and like they really want you to be on this journey. And I was like, that's great, because I literally just met them. So I'm so stoked.
Yeah.
So I really like that in terms of sort of like, yeah, that lineage connection and figuring out what those stories mean to you. And for me, I'm kind of like going through my own process of identifying them slowly but surely in Taurus. Just like, I'm making things for you.
I was gonna say, I was like, you're an artist too, right? Like that feels very connected.
Definitely. I definitely feel like, since I've been doing this work too, like connecting with them, I definitely feel much more guidance coming through, and just like, don't question it, just make the thing, and being like, what? I'm sure Uranus coming through is also connected to that. Like, don't think about it, just do it. Like, but it's definitely like connecting me with, yeah, ideas of like, I didn't just make this up. Like, I'm clearly connected to something before me that I'm just exploring for the first time, or that I'm pioneering this connection to ancestry. So I love that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, such reclamation work for so many of us.
Yeah, my grandma was a Pisces too. I need to look at her chart again. But yeah, I love that. So much magic.
So much magic.
Yeah. Do you guys have any other like final thoughts, words, things to say about the IC that you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I guess that it ties in with the fifth house thing, because I feel like we talked a lot about like an IC in the fourth, and then like a little bit about IC in the third too, because it feels more obvious. But IC in the fifth, I don't see it as often, period. But there is like okay, I'm going to get nerdy for a second. So, so by progression, right, your IC will change signs like a couple times over the course of your life, right? And so people with an IC in the third, at some point within their first few decades of life, it'll move into the fourth, into their fourth sign, right? And then it might even get to the fifth. People with an IC in the fourth, it'll inevitably get into their fifth, and then, maybe into their sixth. But people with an IC in the fifth, it won't by progression ever make it to their fourth, and there's something kind of poignant about that. And of all the ones I see, people who have an IC in the fifth whole sign, it does tend to be more of course, it depends on all the other factors. But there is more of a sort of lack of priority when it comes to, or lack of presence when it comes to sort of fourth house matters in their life. And like, so art, like fifth house topics are kind of more important. And so are 11th house topics, right? And so I see a lot of like chosen family. I see a lot of like lovers and friends who are family come out of looking at these like fifth house, 11th house signatures. I don't know. I just kind of want to like, we're queer. So it's like we want to kind of normalize.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Other than biological or other than like domestic families too. And I think that including in our IC delineations, aspects of the fifth house, I think is a move sort of towards that. Yeah.
I'm really happy you brought that up. Yeah. I think a lot of people are going to be happy that you you gave the IC in the fifth some attention. I definitely see that too. Yeah. I keep having like, I'm like, I can only picture it in Taurus in the fifth house. I feel like I see it mostly with Capricorn risings, to be honest. The midheaven in Scorpio and the IC in Taurus, but obviously it happens with other rising signs too. That just keeps coming up. Oh, Aquarius risings, I see it a lot too. With the IC in Gemini.
Short ascension.
Yeah. That's a really good point. Yeah, Taylor, how about you? Do you have anything to add?
Well, not that's gonna add to that. No, I don't. I'm honestly just taking in everything Pallas has said, and I'm like, oh my god, I can't wait to go read more about this. Anything else? Just that I think, for those who are listening who have not given a lot of thought to this space, I hope that this kind of encourages you to explore all of the richness that's in here. Because it is so much, as we've acknowledged so thoroughly, it is so much, this like final frontier of the chart that is not really externalized, and so therefore is not really looked at so much. But yeah, I hope that this like broadens people's journeys into themselves, because it's so deeply fascinating. And as you said, Pallas, like there's no way to fully know it. Like there's no way to fully know that space. And that's kind of part of, I think, diving into it, is this like, I'm never going to totally see the end of this, but I am seeing so much of myself as I explore this. So
Yeah, hell yeah.
Amazing. Thank you both so much. This is
Thank
so
you.
rich and nourishing. Let's let the people know where they can find you. Taylor.
Yes, I am at That's So Pisces on Instagram and Twitter, and that is also my website, that'sso-pisces.com. I'm pretty much eponymous everywhere. That's it. That's the one name you can find me. Yeah, absolutely.
Cool. And Pallas.
I'm Nine of Wands. You can go to nineofwands.com. So by the time this comes out,
Oh yeah.
the book, we're going to do a Kickstarter in April.
Cool.
Yeah. So you can go to the website and either get on the Patreon, which will only be active for another couple months after the book releases, or while the book's being released. And then, you can get there or just on the mailing list to learn when the Kickstarter is going to launch.
Can't wait for
For that
that.
beautiful weather in April.
Yes. Absolutely.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you both again. This was
Thank
great.
you so much, both of you.
Yeah, this was so nourishing, as you said, Kira. Like just that connection to source. I feel like I'm refueled. I love it.
Amazing.
You guys are amazing.